The Scorch Trials, Chapter 18, on this PDF, page 65. Thomas stared at the runners. He sensed that the other gladers around him had stopped as well, as if there had been an unspoken command to do so. Thomas shivered, something that seemed completely impossible in the sweltering heat. He didn't know why he felt a tickle of cold fear along his back. The gladers outnumbered the approaching strangers almost 10 times over, but the feeling was undeniable. "Everyone pack it in tighter," Minot said, "and get ready to fight these shanks the first sign of trouble." The blurry mirage of upward melting heat obscured the two figures until they were only 100 yards or so away. Thomas's muscles tensed when they came into focus. He remembered all too well what he'd seen through the barred window just a few mornings ago. The cranks. But these people scared him in a different way. They stopped just a couple of dozen feet in front of the gladers. One was a man, the other a woman, though Thomas could only tell this from the lady's slightly curvy figure. Other than that, they had the same build, tall and scrawny. Their heads and faces were almost completely covered in wrappings of tattered beige cloth, small ragged slits cut for them to see and breathe through. Their shirts and pants were a hodgepodge of filthy clothing sewn together, tied with ratty strips of denim in some places. Nothing was exposed to the beating sun but their hands, and those were red and cracked and scabby. The two of them stood there, panting as they caught their breath, a sound like sick dogs. "Who are you?" Minot called out. The strangers didn't respond, didn't move. Their chests heaved in and out. Thomas observed from under his makeshift hood. He couldn't imagine how anyone could run so far and not die of heat exhaustion. "Who are you?" Minot repeated. Instead of answering, the two strangers split apart and started walking in a broad circle around the bunched-up gladers. Their eyes, hidden behind the slits in those old mummy wrappings, stayed fixed on the boys as they made their way in a wide arc, as if sizing them up for a kill. Thomas felt the tension inside him rise, hated when he could no longer see both of them at once. He turned around and watched as they met back up behind the group and once again faced them, standing still. "There are a whole lot more of us than there are of you," Minot said, his voice betraying his frustration. To threaten them so soon seemed desperate. "Start talking. Tell us who you are." "We're cranks." The two words came from the woman, a short burst of guttural annoyance. For no discernible reason, she pointed across the gladers, back toward the town from which they'd run. "Cranks?" Minot said, as he pushed his way through the crowd to be closest to the strangers again. "Just like the ones that tried to break into our building a couple days ago?" Thomas cringed. These people would have no idea what Minot was talking about. Somehow the gladers had traveled a long way from wherever that place had been, through the flat trans. "We're cranks," this time from the man, his voice surprisingly lighter and less gruff than the woman's. But there was no kindness in it. He pointed over the gladers just like his companion had done. "Came to see if you're cranks. Came to see if you've got the flair." Minot turned to look at Thomas and then a few others, his eyebrows raised. No one said anything. He turned back. "Some dude told us we had the flair. Yeah, what can you tell us about it?" "Don't matter," the man responded. The strips of cloth wrapped around his face jiggled with every word. "You got it. You'll know soon enough." "Well, what do you bloody want?" Newt asked, stepping up to stand next to Minot. "What's it matter to you if we're cranks or not?" The woman responded this time, acting as if she hadn't heard the questions. "How'd you get in the Scorch? Where'd you come from? How'd you get here?" Thomas was surprised at the intelligence evident in her words. The cranks they'd seen back at the dorm had seemed absolutely insane, like animals. These people were aware enough to realize that their group had appeared out of nowhere. Nothing lay in the opposite direction from the town. Minot leaned over to consult with Newt, then turned and stepped closer to Thomas. What do we tell these people? Thomas had no clue. I don't know. The truth? It can't hurt. The truth? Minot said sarcastically. What an idea, Thomas. You're freaking brilliant, as usual. He faced the cranks again. We were sent here by Wicked. Came out of a hole just a little while that way, from a tunnel. We're supposed to go 100 miles to the north, cross the Scorch. Any of that mean a thing to you? Once again, it was as if they hadn't heard a word he'd said. Not all cranks are gone, the man said. Not all of them got past the gone. He said the last word in a way that made it sound like the name of a place. Different ones at different levels. Best you learn to make friends with and who to avoid or kill. Better learn right quick if you're coming our way. What's your way? Minot asked. You came from that town, right? Is that where all these cranks live? Is there food and water there? Thomas felt the same urge as Minot to ask a million questions. He half tempted to suggest they capture these two cranks and make them answer. But for the moment, the pair didn't seem intent on helping at all, and they split again to circle back around to the side of the gladers closest to the town. Once they met up in the spot where they'd first spoken, the distant town almost seeming to float between them. The woman said one last thing. If you don't have it yet, you'll have it soon. Same with the other group. The ones there that are supposed to kill you. The two strangers then turned around and ran back toward the cluster of buildings on the horizon, leaving Thomas and the other gladers in stunned silence. Soon, any evidence of the running cranks was lost in a blur of heat and dust. Other group? Someone said. Maybe Frypan. Thomas was in too much of a trance, staring at the disappearing cranks and worrying about the flare to notice. Wonder if they're talking about my group. This was definitely Eris. Thomas finally forced himself to snap out of his gaze. Group B? He asked him. You think they've already made it to the town? Hello, Minot snapped. Who cares? You'd think the little part about them supposedly killing us would be the attention getter. Maybe this stuff about the flare. Thomas thought of the tattoo on the back of his neck, those simple words that scared him. Maybe when she said, you, she didn't mean all of us. He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder, pointing down at the menacing mark. Maybe she meant me specifically. Couldn't tell where her eyes were looking. How's she gonna know who you are? Minot retorted. Plus, doesn't matter. If someone tries to kill you or me or anyone else, they might as well try to get all of us, right? You're so sweet, Frypan said with a snort. Go ahead and die with Thomas. I think I'll sneak away and enjoy living with the guilt. He cast his special look that meant he was only kidding. But Thomas wondered if a little truth might be hiding in there somewhere. Well, what do we do now? Jack asked. He had Winston's arm around one of his shoulders, but the former keeper of the bloodhouse seemed to have recovered from some of his strength. Luckily, the sheet covered the hideous parts of his head. What do you think? Newt asked, but then nodded at Minot. Minot rolled his eyes. We keep going, that's what. Look, we don't have a choice. If we don't get to that town, we're going to die out here of sunstroke or starvation. If we do go, we'll have some shelter for a while, maybe even food. Cranks or no cranks, that's what we're going. And Group B? Thomas asked. He glanced over at Eris, or whoever they were talking about. What if they really do want to kill us? All we have to fight with are our hands. Minot flexed his right arm. If these people are really the girls Eris was hanging out with, I'll show them these guns of mine and they'll go running. Thomas kept pushing. And if these girls have weapons or can fight, or if it's not them at all, but a bunch of 7-foot-tall grunts who like to eat humans, or 1,000 cranks. Thomas, no, everybody. Minot let out an exasperated sigh. Would everyone just shut their holes and slim it? No more questions. Unless you have an idea that doesn't involve absolute certain death, then quit your piping and let's take the only chance we got. Get it? Thomas smiled, though he didn't know where the impulse came from. Somehow, in a few sentences, Minot had cheered him up, or at least given him a little hope. They just had to go, to move, to do. That was it. That's better, Minot said with a satisfied nod. Anybody else want to pee their pants and cry for mommy? A few snickers broke out, but no one said anything. Good. Newt, you lead up front this time, limp and all. Thomas, you in the back. Jack, get someone else to help with Winston to give you a break. Let's go. And so they did. Eris held the pack this time, and Thomas felt as if he were almost floating along the ground. It felt so good. The only hard part was holding up that sheet, his arm growing weak and rubbery. But on and on they went, sometimes walking, sometimes jogging. Luckily, the sun seemed to gain weight and drop more quickly the closer it got to the horizon. By Thomas's wristwatch, the cranks had only been gone an hour when the sky turned to a purplish orange, and the intense glare of the sun started to melt away into a more pleasant glow. Not long after that, it disappeared below the horizon altogether, pulling nighttime and stars across the sky like a curtain. The gladers kept moving, heading toward the faint twinkle of lights coming from the town. Thomas could almost enjoy it now that he wasn't holding the pack and they'd put the sheet away. Finally, when every last trace of dusk had gone, full darkness settled on the land like a black fog.